Hey Samfam, this is Shreya from Samaya. Now we are going to discuss about SA 265, which is communicating deficiencies in internal control to those charged with governance and management. And auditor had gone to audit the financial statements in an entity, but as per SA 315, what he has to do, he has to also obtain understanding of a business environment, including its internal control. While understanding the internal controls, what he has to find, he had find any deficiencies with regard to any kind of internal financial statements. What he has to do, he has to communicate them with TCWG or management. Now, we'll see the objective of the auditor under SA 265. The objective of the auditor is to communicate appropriately to TCWG and management what deficiencies in internal control that auditor identified during the audit and in auditor's professional judgment are of sufficient importance to merit their respective attentions. What he has to communicate, he has to communicate the deficiencies of internal control. How did he find deficiencies in internal control? Well, during the audit. Okay. But why he has to communicate to TCWG or management? Were they so important? Yes, in auditor's professional judgment, they're sufficiently important to merit respective attentions. That is, it is important to drag the attention of, to put the attention of TCWG and management in those deficiencies in internal control. What are deficiencies on internal control mean? Deficiency in internal control exists when a control is designed, implemented, or operated in a such a way that it is unable to prevent, detect, or correct misstatement in financial statements on a timely basis. See, what's the responsibility of the management? Responsibility of the management is to prepare financial statements and design, implement, and maintain internal controls which help the financial statements to be material free from any kind of material misstatement or error or any kind of fraud. But there exists a control which is designed, implemented, and operated, which is unable to prevent, detect, correct misstatements in the financial statements. You see, control exists, but it is unable to do its work. In that case, it's a deficiency in internal control. And second thing, a control necessary to prevent, detect, and correct misstatement in financial statement on a timely basis is missing. There doesn't exist a control itself. Here it exists, but is unable to do its job. Here the control itself isn't existing. So this any kind of these two situations cause a deficiency in internal control. Significant deficiency in internal control is a deficiency that in auditor's professional judgment is sufficient important to merit the attention of those charged with governance. You see, by this time you would have understood what's the key phrase of it. In order to add a significant here, like the phrase, you have to put it in the answer. You have to put that in auditor's professional judgment, it is sufficient important to merit attention of TCWG and management. And with this is what this summary portion is something to not so important, but a foundation level where you have to compulsorily revise it one day before the examination to write your answers better for a better understanding. These are the things that you already know, but giving a just brushing up so that you could write it better. And first, we'll dive into SA 265 now. Auditor shall communicate with TCWG in writing on a timely basis. Okay, what are the things how he shall communicate with TCWG and management? All the significant deficiencies in internal control. What are significant deficiencies? That as per auditor's judgment, they were sufficiently important to give the attention of TCWG or management. What are sufficient significant deficiencies here? Significant deficiencies are that are leading to material misstatement in financial statements. These deficiencies in the internal control lead to material misstatements. Not misstatement, it is material misstatement. It is significant deficiencies which lead to material misstatement, not general misstatement. This doesn't apply to normal exceptions in the internal control or not few deficiencies which lead to misstatement. It leads to material misstatement. We have to make a note out of it. Suspectability of a loss or fraud which is related to asset or liability, which leads to any loss or fraud. Subjectivity. You see, auditor and management has to be objective. They should not show any kind of bias. So if they are showing any bias like subjectivity and complexity in accounting estimates, such as fair value accounting estimates, this also leads to a significant deficiency. volume of activity that are occurred or could occur in the account balance or class of transactions exposed to a deficiency or deficiencies. You see, any kind of volumes of activities or transactions that were happening in such accounting balance. You see, internal controls also exist or wise with a class of transaction. Like there were few internal controls with regards to sales and few with regards to collection from debtors. Like those particular account balance, if the volume of depends upon the volume of the activity, that could have a deficiency of that with regards to that internal controls relating to that class of or account balance transactions and significant transactions which are in which management is financially interested and not being appropriately scrutinized by TCWG. These were unusual transactions or transaction in which management was financially interested. You see, when we discuss about the hierarchy of the company, first comes the employees and then management, and above management TCWG. All the transactions or that entered by the management has to be reviewed by TCWG or audit committee if applicable to that company. They were not properly scrutinized by TCWG. So this is a significant deficiency in the internal control system. And identification of management fraud is here. Management is doing fraud. Here we have found suspectability of any kind of fraud. Here the management is doing fraud here. Absence of risk assessment process within the entity. Design, implement, and maintenance of internal controls has to be done by the management, but the management itself is not doing any kind of risk assessment process with regards to that internal controls it is being implemented. There exists a significant deficiency. That is, the control here is absent here. And here is a management fraud and fraud or loss with regards to any asset or liability and any deficiencies that could lead to a material misstatement or complexity of transactions in the accounting estimates, and the transactions that were entered by the management were not scrutinized by TCWG, and there's a volume of activity that occurred in accounting balance expected to be deficient. These were all the significant deficiencies which auditor has to communicate, and what he has to communicate along with that when he found that significant deficiency. This is what all is identification of significant deficiencies. Now, after identification, what he has to do? He has to communicate with the TCWG. What he has to communicate? He has to communicate the description of deficiencies and explanation of their potential effects. As we have discussed in our keyword kit 2, I think we have discussed how to communicate, what all the things we have to communicate. An outline has been given there, right? The same was applied here. You see, these were not something of my own. These were all by ICA. But what did I try to do is that to figure out a common outline so that we could read less and retain long for a longer period of time and retrieve the answers fast in the examination. You see how long we prepare or how much we study. ICA only tests how much we analyze the question and how well we could write the answer. If you find out, if you read it in an outline basis, it is very easy to fit all the information into that outline, and you could write it so simple, and you could write or infuse all the keywords that ICA is wanting you to write. So that's what we are also doing here. Significant deficiencies. After that, what he has to communicate? He has to describe that and its potential effects on the financial statement. Why he has to mention the potential effects? Why auditor has went to the entity to audit the financial statement? So he has to also give the explanation why what are the potential effects that the financial statements were facing due to these internal control deficiencies, and sufficient information to enable TCWG management to understand the context of communication. There exists might be a few. This is mostly useful when in a situation where the management asks the auditor, "Why are you so concerned with the deficiencies in the internal auditor?" For that, this is what the answer for that. The purpose of the audit. What is the purpose of the audit? Purpose of the audit is to audit the financial statements to form an opinion on that they were materially free from any kind of misstatements or error or any kind of fraud. That's what the purpose of audit we have to communicate. And audit included considerations. It also includes the internal controls. Audit has to be done as per SGs. Under SA 315 here, it also has included internal controls with regards to maintenance of preparation of financial statements. So we have to also tell that auditor include consideration of internal control relevant to preparation of financial statement in order to design audit procedures. If the internal controls were satisfied, we could do prepare audit procedures to that level. If they were not satisfactory and there exists a risk of material misstatement, then we have to put some extra effort, some other extra audit procedures in order to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. So we have to also give our justification with regards to that, and matters being reported are limited to those deficiencies that auditor has identified during the audit and that auditor has concluded are sufficient to report to TCWG. Auditor has to report all the deficiencies in the audit that he's doing, right? And the auditor has to conclude they are sufficient to report to TCW. He, with his professional judgment, has to conclude whether these deficiencies or these matters, these all the matters that he found were sufficient to report the TCWG. And what all the other information for further consideration were about the management's understanding of actual or suspected causes of deficiencies and a preliminary indication from management of its response to the findings. You see, again, we have to discuss about the management's responsibility regarding internal control. They have to design, implement, and maintain that. While doing that, while maintaining, whether they have any preliminary indication of that findings or response to that findings, and management's understanding of that deficiencies of actual or suspected cause or the parties who are overriding such controls, and exceptions arising from deficiencies that management may have noted. What are these exceptions? These exceptions were not significant enough. They were not significant that would bring attention or merit the attention of TCWG, but there exists some kind of a deviation from the internal control, how it has to be worked. And these all the three things also have to be checked by the or taken into consideration by the auditor while communicating the deficiencies. What management's understanding of actual or suspected causes of deficiencies, all the exceptions or preliminary indication from management of its response to that findings. That is how the management is responding to that after we communicate. And we have discussed the significant deficiencies, and the last part is the factors that auditor may consider in determining appropriate level of detail for the communication. These are the things he has to communicate. Till what extent he have to communicate depends upon this. Depends upon the nature of the entity, size and complexity of the entity, nature of the significant deficiencies. This is the subject matter here. Nature of the significant deficiencies and nature of the entity were two things we have to discuss about. And the size and complexity of the entity is something usually we get it every time when we find similar kind of point like this. And entity's governance composition. What is governance composition? Whether there exists any TCWG or there exists any kind of audit committee in between, etc. Like that. Depending upon the management TCWG audit committee governance hierarchy to whom they have to report what all the deficiencies they found in the internal control system, and legal and regulatory requirements, which is a gray area, which we always write with regards to any kind of, if we found any kind of word that is fraud, we'll write legal and regulatory requirements. And with that said, we have completed essay 265, and do subscribe the channel as we are planning to do a series called how to write audit answer in examination chapter wise from mid of the April first week. Do leave a like, share and subscribe.